National Apprenticeship Week. You're here today with the Solent Apprenticeship Hub and the EM3 Apprenticeship and Skills Hub. And today we are joined by Sarah Bourne from Kiwi Training and Gary Callahan from DA Training. And they're both here to tell us a little bit more about what an assessor and a coach is. We often get a lot of questions from all different types of employers that ask us, what does an assessor do? What does the coach do? What does that mean for my business and how do I interact? So we're here to ask all the questions that you employers have asked us, and we've got two experts here that will answer them lovely for us. So without further ado, I'm going to launch into the questions, guys, if that's okay. Sarah, I'll start with you. What exactly is an assessor or a coach?
Good question. So I would say the assessor or the coach, depending on what you want to call it, is the person from the training provider that's going to guide and support the apprentice through their apprenticeship. So we might come in and do some training and some learning with the apprentice. We'll guide and support them through any functional skills and help them through their endpoint assessor as well. So we are their main contact at the training provider.
Perfect. Gary, anything to add?
Yeah, just to say, you might have one assessor, you might have two assessors, depending on their subject knowledge. They support people in classroom-based or face-to-face or even virtual, as we're having to do now. They'll act as the kind of coordinator between the employer, the provider, and the apprentice, and help contribute to the review process that I'm sure you'll all become familiar with as well.
And how often would I expect to see my assessor, Gary?
That's down to the sort of planning that you have with your training provider and your apprentice and the employer. Some programs do face-to-face meetings every month or visits over Zoom or whatever each month, and some do sort of classroom-based sessions where you might go and the apprentice might go for 3 or 4 days at a time. So it is down to kind of what you feel best is for yourself as the employer and the apprentice and what program they're on. But mostly you should expect at least contact every 6 weeks at the very, very most.
Sarah, anything to add?
Yeah, no, I agree exactly with what Gary just said. The average is that we will meet with learners once a month. But as you say, it very much depends on what program they're on, what their working shift is as well, so how their working pattern pans out, and how busy they are at work. They might have a busy month, a quiet month, or a couple of weeks a month that is a no-go. So, for example, payroll learners, there are a couple of weeks in the month that you just don't go there.
So what I'm hearing is that actually it's really flexible, and that at the beginning of your apprenticeship, you'll be speaking to the employer about, you know, when's good, when's not good, exactly what you said, Sarah, about that payroll instance. Yeah. But the employer will have a good idea at the beginning of the programme when he's likely to see the assessor or the coach.
Yes.
Perfect. And what sort of things should employers have ready for their apprentices when the assessor and the coach comes in? Sarah?
So the main thing for us at the moment is making sure that there is time and space. So it depends whether the apprentice is currently in the workplace or working from home, and therefore technology as well. So we're doing all of our training at the moment online. So they will need a computer or a laptop, preferably with a webcam, but it doesn't have to be. So that technology would be really helpful to make sure they've got that up front and ready to go.
Anything else, Gary?
I think for us, it's what you decide as the employer, equipment they're going to need throughout their journey working for you. So just because they're apprentice, they get exactly the same rights as a normal member of staff. So if your normal staff get uniform, give them some uniform, make them feel part of it. Something that's probably really key is probably make sure that you've got the job role right for that person. Make sure that their job description fits the apprenticeship. We've certainly come across instances where employers say, oh, I want someone to come and help with the administration, but they're not actually looking for that. So make sure that the job role fits what they're going to do is probably the biggest sticking point there.
Perfect, thank you. And for an employer, how often is the update for them from that assessor coach? Do they get sort of regular progress reports?
Yeah, so So we invite the employer to be a part of every sort of session. Whether they're there for the whole session is down to the sort of agreement between everyone. Some employers might want to jump in because they'll be providing valuable input, but they should certainly be present towards the end, or the learner's mentor, to add their sort of feedback on and comments on the development of the apprentice. They should also look at their sort of online portfolios, be aware of the off-the-job learning, and sort of sign that off as well. So yeah, the employer really does need to have a good knowledge of where the progress of each learner is.
And that's easy to obtain, Sarah, from their assessor and coach, I'm assuming.
Yes, very. So we have really good relationships with our employers, so we get them involved at the beginning. So we build up that relationship. So it's easy to pick up the phone and have a chat with us or send us an email. But also every time we meet with a learner, we will fill in a teaching, learning and assessment record that sort of captures all of the information about what was taught, what was learned, what the actions are, and what the progress is at the moment. So from that gets sent to the line manager as well, so they can instantly see, are they ahead of target, behind progress and might need a little bit extra support, or are we on track?
And if there is an apprentice, let's say, that's behind on progress, how can the employer get involved in that? How can they help and support?
I would say the best way is to have a conversation, a three-way conversation between assessor, learner and the employer. Look at what actions are outstanding at the moment, and first of all, try and work out whether there's a reason for that. So is it that they haven't had the time? Is it that they don't understand the action? Or is it that they need a little bit more support from the employer, either knowledge or be able to get access to a certain piece of software at work? It could be anything at all. So having that open conversation about what's holding them back, what's the barrier to them moving forward, and then working together to make sure we break down those barriers and come up with a really solid plan for how we're going to move forward.
Funny you should say about time, Sarah, because one of the questions we often get is, should I set aside a specific amount of time to allow my apprentice to do their work? What's your thoughts on that, Gary?
So yeah, absolutely. The words off-the-job learning will become very, very familiar with you as an employer on this journey. And it's sort of the words that a lot of people dread when they start going into a program. So as an employer, you're expected to give at least 20% of the apprentice's working time to them for off-the-job learning. It doesn't have to be every Monday or every Wednesday. It can be in blocks. It can be however you want it. It can be a couple of hours a day. But what's key is that it's actually planned. What you don't need to be doing is getting 6 months into the program and saying, "Oh, I haven't done any off-the-job learning yet." Your provider won't let that happen. And so the key is at the beginning, it's all planned out. The provider will give you some ideas you've covered. The employer will have some ideas, and the apprentice will, and you structure it. And things are flexible as long as it's reflected within the learning documents you create, whether it's an ILP or a curriculum plan and whatever. If for some reason something doesn't happen 1 month, that's okay. Things happen. You just note it down and you change your plans moving forward.
So it's all pretty flexible then?
Absolutely.
Perfect. How much support should an apprentice require in their role? What's the norm, Sarah?
I don't think there is a norm, unfortunately. I think it will be different for every learner, every programme, depending on where that learner is in their career as well, whether they've worked for the company for a really long time or whether they're going in as a new employee. So unfortunately, it will be very individual to that learner. And again, it's all about having the conversation between the three of you and making sure that the employer is fully aware of how much support that learner is going to need. If they're new to the organisation, obviously we want you to run through all the normal induction process anyway. So you're going to have a more hands-on approach with a new employee. But even if a learner has worked with you for 5 years and they're doing an apprenticeship, they still might need to know some systems that they didn't know before, some knowledge that they haven't quite reached before, because we're stretching and we're challenging them. So we want them to learn new things. So either the line manager or somebody else in the organisation is acting as a mentor for them. So a go-to if they've got any questions or if they need help with any of their learning.
And Gary, that mentor role is really important, isn't it?
Absolutely. line managers with the greatest will in the world don't always have the time to provide the apprentice the support they need. And, you know, apprentices can have different mentors, as I kind of alluded to earlier. What you're looking for is the best person to give that apprentice the knowledge on that part they're working on. So, for example, you might have a mentor in place for someone that does a certain computer program they might work in. But that mentor might not know another system, so you might swap their mentor. But again, as long as it's documented, it's actually really good practice.
Perfect, thank you. You've led me on quite nicely to my next question. So, Sarah, what is the rough split of support-wise, what the employer should expect their mentor or their line manager to give versus what the assessor and coach should give?
Again, I don't think there's a clear answer, unfortunately. It will depend on the learner and what they're looking for at the time. But sort of the assessor and the coach are there to impart knowledge, deliver the training, help with the apprentice stuff. So we get the list of the knowledge, and these are the things we need to know. So we'll help with that training. Where the mentor comes in handy is then you can go away, ask that mentor, okay, I've got the theory, I know how it's meant to work, but now show me how it's meant to work in practice and how we actually do it in the workplace. Because it's all very well learning about all the theories, but if it doesn't fit well with the way that you work, then it's difficult to understand how you're meant to do it. So I would guess in that sense, there's a 50-50 split of taking the knowledge and then going to the mentor and asking the questions. But again, it will depend on the learner and how much input they want from their mentor and how much input they need.
Yeah, I think it's always really difficult, isn't it, to sort of, every apprentice is different, every standard is different, and there's so much variety with over, 500 standards and as many different types of people and apprentices that we've got in this world. So yeah, totally understand, it's not an easy question. I think we've sort of answered this, but I will ask it in a slightly different way because it's one that we get asked quite a lot. If an employer, Gary, had, a real busy couple of weeks, whether, they were in a retail environment and they had a summer sale, or I don't know, any of those examples, could they stop attending off the job to, take account of that so that they're there in the employer's busiest time?
Yes, so it is a very interesting question. I would probably avert from using not attend. I think the idea would be flexibility again. We work in some industries where, for example, the outdoor sector, outdoor activities, at the moment, they can't run activities. They can't do the observations. They can't run those parts of the programme. So actually, we can focus on the off-the-job now. And yet, when we move into peak summer season, fingers crossed, that part will be able to be done. So yeah, flexibility is the word there. And of course, although you as the employer might see that as, oh, it's our peak trading, they're going to be so busy doing so many of these things. Actually, that's a really good time to gather evidence from an assessor's point of view. They're busy doing and they're not even thinking about it. So it might just be a change of assessment methods. It might be more observational. It might be witness testimonies. But yeah, an open dialogue and flexibility, I think, is really the key with that.
Yeah, I'd agree. So probably one of our last questions we get quite commonly is around the endpoint assessment, and we haven't really touched on that, and we're doing actually a whole video focusing on endpoint assessment. But can you give us, Sarah, some top line information about what an endpoint assessment is?
Yeah, so your endpoint assessment for any apprenticeship is the final assessment to get you through and completed. So we'll be looking at work throughout, we'll be assessing it as we go along, but this is your final test or exam or observation, depending on what apprenticeship you're doing. And it's normally conducted by an external body, so the training provider will support you all the way through, and then you'll be assessed by an external body, whoever that might be for your apprenticeship. So you have to be on programme for 1 year and 9 days, and more often than not, that's the point when, if you're ready, you can start to go through your endpoint assessment. And that could be anything. It could be online tests, so multiple choice tests. It could be professional discussions, presentations, observations. It just depends completely on what apprenticeship you're doing.
Lovely. And Gary, what who decides that the apprentice is ready for the endpoint assessment?
Yeah, so again, it's these three parties that we keep talking about. It's the training provider, it's the apprentice, and the employer. But everybody might have a different perception of where that apprentice is. But the most important thing is, through the journey of that apprentice's learning, you'll gather ideas and be able to work out, are they on time for their gateway review? And gateway reviews are key parts of getting to endpoint assessment. If they get to that gateway assessment and have completed a mock endpoint assessment, and that shows they're ready, chances are they're going to be ready. But there is no worry. Some people get to the gateway and something might delay them. It can be extended. It's not always ideal, and there is some time frames within certain standards where once gateway's reached, endpoint assessment has to occur. But the main thing is, again, flexibility. The parties, the training provider will coordinate that with the endpoint assessment organisation and make sure that when all parties think that person's ready, they can go through the gateway and onto endpoint assessment.
Okay, so if I'm an employer and I think that my apprentice is, ready sooner, or perhaps I think that they're not quite ready yet, there is some flexibility in that date, is there, Sarah?
There is, yeah. And I think the key thing is here is that we know a rough idea of that date when we start with the apprentice. So right from the very beginning, we're aiming for that date, and we keep that conversation open. So if the line manager is coming to us and saying, I don't think they're ready, we will be putting stuff in place to make sure they are ready, because we've got time. So it's all about planning and keeping that line of communication open.
That's perfect. I think that brings us to the end of all of our questions. Huge thank you to both Sarah and Gary for being our experts. We really appreciate your time. If you have any further questions that you'd like to ask either Sarah or Gary, pop a comment under this video, send us a private message, and we'll get those questions to these two experts to get you some answers for. Thank you again, guys.
No worries, thank you.